What's up, YouTube? I want to talk about reloading data for a minute. So I've got a Lyman reloading manual open. I want to go through how to read the reloading data in a Lyman reloading manual. And then I'm going to go to my favorite reloading manual, which is the Lee reloading manual. So let's start with Lyman. I've got this open to the 30-06, and I want to show you some things. So the 30-06 Springfield can also be called the 7.62 by 63 millimeter. And so they give you both names in the manual. And they give you all these cartridge dimensions. Now, for the most part, these dimensions are of the brass, and you can't change them. The only thing a lot of these dimensions here are for, so this dimension here is going to give you the dimension from the base to the bottom of the shoulder. This is to the center of the shoulder, and then this is to the end of the brass, right? So this is the two ends of the shoulder, basically. You can't change those. That's how it's formed. The diameter at the shoulder, you shouldn't be changing that. The rim thickness, you shouldn't be changing that. But if you got a cartridge that doesn't want to chamber right, if something's wrong, you buy a batch of brass and it doesn't work right, these dimensions you can measure and see if they're correct. So you can measure this length from the base to the beginning of the shoulder. You can measure the base thickness here, 0.049, things like that. And if you find that those things are not correct, then you got a bad batch of brass. Now, the things for you as a reloader that you've got to know is you've got to know your brass length. So from your base here to the end of your neck, that's your total overall brass length. So for this cartridge, it's 2.494. Now, in the Lyman reloading manual, this is a maximum dimension. That means that your brass needs to be that long or shorter. And depending on the manual, they'll recommend how much shorter than that, usually 10 to 20 thousandths shorter. There's pretty narrow windows in reloading data. But if your brass is 2.495 inches, there's a chance that the end of this neck engages the rifling or the throat and creates a high pressure situation. So you always want to make sure this is a maximum length on your brass, and you want to make sure that you don't exceed that, okay? Second one is from here to here. This dimension, 3.340. That is the maximum overall cartridge length. And a lot of manuals will call that the Colt, cartridge overall length. That dimension is two things. Number one is most guns, if you exceed this dimension, it may not feed properly through the magazine, or it may not fit in the magazine. But the second one is, again, dealing with the round chambering, is if this bullet is sticking out of the brass further than it should, i.e. you exceed the Colt, then this bullet can actually engage the rifling before you fire the cartridge. In some cases, that makes it very difficult to chamber. In some cases, it won't chamber, and in some cases, it can lead to a chamber pressure spike. Now, why is the Lyman manual great? I'm going to show you some load data here. I'm going to flip to this 150 grain jacketed XLC bullet, okay? You're going to see it gives some powders. It gives a starting suggestion. It gives a velocity, a pressure, a max load, a velocity, and a pressure. And you never exceed the maximum velocity in these reloading manuals. And the rule for pretty much all of these reloading manuals, and I'll pick a nice round number, 53 grains here. So 7/48, 53 grains, okay? The rule is always going to be you're going to start 10% below that, so 5.3 grains below that, or at the starting grains, whichever is higher. And so in this case, 5.3 grains taken from 53 would be below 48, so we would start at 48 and work up to 53, okay? So that's the first thing. Now, the Lyman manual is great because if I flip over one page, and of course the pages are sticking together, I can't get it to flip. If you buy a Lyman bullet mold, they will have their mold and data for that exact bullet in their manual. And so if you mold your own bullets using a Lyman bullet mold, you can find data that matches your mold number so that you can load your exact bullet. So that's kind of cool. That's what makes a Lyman manual pretty cool. I want to flip over to one of my favorite cartridges. I'm going to flip to the 4570 Government. And I do want to show you for certain cartridges, the 4570 is one of them. you will actually see 3 sections in this manual. The first one says for 1873 Springfield. These are for the old trapdoor model guns that are loaded to black powder specifications. I'll let you take a second look at the cartridge dimensions. One of the cartridge dimensions I failed to mention on the 30-06 that I want to point out here is this dimension here, which is the bullet diameter. This is the recommended bullet diameter for this cartridge. And again, you got your brass trim length here, and you got your cartridge overall length here. Trim your brass to that or just a hair shorter, and your cartridge should not exceed this length if you want it to chamber correctly and not have a pressure spike. Now, that's for the 1873 Springfield. If I turn the page, I go to the next section. It says 4570 Government. What does it say? This time it says 1886 Winchester or 1895 Marlin. If you look, the dimensions are the same. The difference is going to be the pressures are higher. This gun is designed to a higher pressure so you can get more powder, more pressure, more velocity. And then if I go to the third and final 4570 section, this is data designed only for the Ruger number 1 and Ruger number 3. Some of the newer Lyman manuals will also include bolt action 4570s. There are some bolt action 4570s out there. Again, same cartridge dimensions, but you're going to get more powder, more pressure. Okay, so that's the Lyman manual and how to read it. Now, the advantage to the Lyman manual, again, is cast bullets. There is a disadvantage, and to show you that, I need to show you the other manual. All right, guys, so I am back. I've got the 4570. This is the Lee Modern Reloading version 2 manual. This is the 4570, and notice it says 95 lever action. Okay, this is the 1895 lever action data, similar to the Lyman manual. It specifically says do not use these loads in trapdoor or rolling block arms. Okay, so it's specifically telling you that. You're going to see it's going to be the same cartridge dimensions. You're going to have that same maximum length for your brass and the maximum length for your cartridge. And in a lever action, if you exceed this cartridge overall length, it will not cycle through the lever action. So the reason I like this manual so much is I want to show you something interesting. If I come down here to a 300 grain jacketed bullet, and you'll see I've got some loads marked because these are powders that I keep on hand that I've used before. Something that this manual includes that I really, really, really enjoy. If I go back to the top here, you've got your starting load. You got your volume CC. That tells you which, how to set up your powder measure, which I kind of like. It also tells you if there's an auto disc associated with it or a lead dipper that's associated with it. It gives you your velocity. You never exceed maximum charge, your maximum velocity, your pressure. The pressure, whether it's in cup or PSI. But here's my favorite one. It gives you the minimum overall length. So up here, you've got a maximum, 2.550. Okay, 2.550. That is a recommended maximum for basically a generic bullet profile, okay? If that makes any sense. So why? Because profiles are different. A pointy bullet will not engage the rifle like a round nose will. So this round nose bullet here would engage the rifling before a very pointy bullet would, okay? So if you come down here to the actual load data, they give you a minimum overall length, okay? So you got a minimum overall length. Now what this does, and what I've learned in my reloading time, so like for an example, if I go back to my 300 grain jacketed bullet that I like to load, I've got minimum overall lengths for a lot of these powders, 2.525, 2.525, 2.525, 2.540. And if I go back to the top, 2.550. So I've got a minimum and a maximum. I've got a window to stay in when I'm loading these rounds. And I really like that because a lot of times we see, you know, there's a cantilever, there's a crimp groove. We're going to load it to that crimp groove. What you don't realize is some powders do not behave well if you compress them. Load somewhere between the maximum overall length for cycling and the minimum overall length, which is a pressure concern. If you overseat a bullet and you compress powder that does not compress well, you can get a pressure spike, and it can blow your gun up. So anyway, that is the 4570 1895 load data. And I had one other set of load data bookmarked here that I wanted to show you guys, which is the 45 Colt, okay, 45 Colt. And the reason I wanted to show you that is you've got 45 Colt load data. And just to be real careful that you read your manual. Don't just, oh, go straight here and start loading, because this is 45 Colt. But if I flip a couple of pages, just flip a couple of pages here. I got that bookmark because there's a load I use. You get 45 Colt, Ruger and Thompson center only, okay? Some of the really heavy Rugers like the Super Blackhawks and the single-shot Thompson centers can take a much higher pressure. So if I look at the pressure on these loads, they're in the 29, right at the 30,000 PSI. But if I go back to the 45 Colt loads, whoa, too far. If I go back to the 45 Colt loads that I had bookmarked earlier, look at the PSI on these. They're 13, 13, 14, 13, 14, 12, 10. So big difference between the standard 45 Colt that can be fired in any gun and the 45 Colt Ruger and TC only loads, which are made for a very, very strong action. So read your load data carefully. And again, just to go over this one more time, the stuff you can change, you've got your trim length on the 45 Colt, and you've got your overall length on the 45 Colt. And again, if I come down here, the minimum overall length, 1.5, maximum 1.6. And the idea is you got 100 thousandths of playroom here. What you don't want to do is overseat these bullets. If you seat below the minimum overall length on these, you could be compressing a powder charge and causing a pressure spike. So, and remember, everything in reloading is about testing. So could there be someone out there that is loading not to the manual? Absolutely. But they could have worked up to that with years and years and years of trying different loads and checking for pressure signs. So do not ever just jump straight in, go straight to the max load, right? So go straight to the max load and then seat below the minimum overall length. Because if you do that, it is a recipe for disaster. So anyway, I hope that helps some folks. If you're getting into reloading, reading the data is really, really important. The other cool thing about the load data in the Lee, like I said, if I pick, say, a pistol, so the 45 Colt would be a great example. So take the 45 Colt here. I was talking about this auto disc earlier. It tells you which auto disc will get you started. And so if you're using the Lee equipment with the Lee loading manual, it's a pretty nice system because it tells you which auto disc to use to get started. And usually for pistol rounds, I try to go somewhere between the start load and the maximum load. Somewhere between those two. I try to pick an auto disc that'll throw somewhere between those two, especially for revolver bullets where you're not using the revolver to cycle the action like you do a semi-auto. So anyway, I hope this helps somebody. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments, guys. I've been reloading for a long time, and I enjoy it a lot. And I've got several different loading manuals. This is the one I tend to reach for the most because it has such a huge amount of data. I've got the Lyman as the first manual I ever bought. I have a Barnes manual because I load small copper bullets. And then Hornady publishes all of their data at their, not Hornady, excuse me, Ogden publishes a bunch of load data at their load data center online. And a lot of that is in the Lee manual, but it's also posted online and you can access that for free. So anyway, and like I said, a lot of that data is actually in this Lee manual, so I don't have to have an internet connection. I can just open up my manual and find what I'm looking for. So anyway, hope it helps, guys. Appreciate your support. Please like and subscribe. And if you have questions, leave them in the comments. Thanks.